There it is. There we are. Hello, welcome. I know some folks are still trickling in. That's totally fine. We're so glad you're joining us today, Sunday afternoon, to hear from Karen E.D. Seibert. I'm so excited to learn more about Werner Drewes. In just a minute, I'll ask John Farley to come up and speak a little bit more about Karen's background, but wanted to welcome you properly to the Lawrence B. and Shirley Gang Memorial Lecture. This was started as an initiative for our docents, and we're so glad that it has expanded to include the public. So thank you very much for being here. I'm Liz Simmons, the new executive director, and looking forward to learning more about Drewes today. So if our senior curator, John Farley, would like to come up and say a few words, we'll welcome him.
Thank you, Liz. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dr. Lawrence B. and Shirley Gang Memorial Lecture. I'm John Farley. I'm the curator and exhibition designer here at the Huntington Museum of Art. And I'm, of course, honored to be involved with this program. The Dr. Lawrence B. and Shirley Gang Memorial Lecture was established by the generosity of the Gang family. Shirley Gang was a docent at the museum many years ago. She believed strongly in providing an educational opportunity and experience for the museum's docents, as well as our broader audience. Today's lecture will be presented by Karen E.D. Seibert of the Werner Drewes Estate and Drewes Fine Art. For more than 4 decades, Karen has been representing the work of acclaimed artist and teacher, Werner Drewes, who profoundly influenced the development of abstract art in 20th century America. Drewes studied at the Bauhaus, the innovative German art school founded by architect Walter Gropius, who later designed our museum's 1968 addition and studios. It has been a pleasure to work closely with Karen to organize this exhibit. She's a true friend of the Huntington Museum of Art and the granddaughter of Werner Drewes, whom she refers to as Opa. Articles by Karen have been published in On Paper, which is a journal of the Washington Print Club, as well as Journal of the Print World. We would like to thank our sponsor, Richard C. von Hess Foundation, for presenting this exhibit. This exhibit is presented also with support from the City of Huntington Mayor's Council for the Arts. This exhibit is presented with support from the Isabel Gwynn and Robert Dane Exhibition Endowment. And this program is presented with financial assistance from the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History and the National Endowment for the Arts, with approval from the West Virginia Commission on the Arts. We're delighted to have Karen here with us today for this afternoon's presentation. Please take a moment following the lecture and the brief question and answer session to enjoy the exhibit, which you'll find in our Joan and Arthur Weisberg Family Gallery, as well as the reception, which is in the Virginia Van Zant Hall. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Karen E.D. Seibert.
I appreciate you coming out on this Sunday. I have to thank you for coming to the Huntington Museum of Art today. This is a gem of a museum, not only as an institution supporting the arts and nature, but also as the last architectural project of Walter Gropius, the founder and first director of the Bauhaus Institute in Germany. That is the connection that brings this collection of Werner Drewes here, as he was a student at the Bauhaus. I'm Karen Drewes Seibert. Thank you for the introduction. Youngest granddaughter of the artist. I grew up surrounded by Drewes' work and have represented my grandfather through lectures, museum and gallery shows, and published articles for over 40 years now. Today, we're surrounded by the woodcuts and oils of Werner Drewes. Most know him as a Bauhaus artist that emigrated to New York City and continued an industrious career in painting and printmaking, teaching, and spurring the American abstract art scene in the United States. But how did he get here? What I'd like to do today is give you a ride through a life of this most creative, energetic man who had a passion and drive that we would all vie for. As a young child, Werner was born to a Lutheran minister. He would accompany his father on his rounds in the rural part of Germany near Brandenburg, very close to the Polish border of what was then Silesia. He grew up in nature and was active in the Wandervogel, a youth group that enjoyed hiking, folk singing, dancing, studying literature, and discussing new ideas. They often sketched on their hikes, and his talents were soon recognized by a gym teacher of his, Arnold Topp. Topp was an artist at Der Sturm. Excuse these terrible pictures, but I wanted you to get the essence of who this man was and what his art was like. That was an organization that had a gallery devoted to avant-garde works, very controversial, non-objective themes. And Topp took a fondness to Werner, as he was a good gymnast and a good artist, and he presented Werner with his first set of art supplies. His first experience with printing was as a teen in 1918. His mother wanted him to craft something for their anniversary party. Werner was feeling lazy, or we might say wanted to be efficient, so he printed out a flower design and then hand-colored each of them differently. About this time, he joined the war efforts of World War I and fought for the Germans in France. He was recruited. He was out of his element and used sketching and studying philosophy to pass the time and retain his composure. Asked if he killed anyone, he replied, "I only shot once and it was way up in the air." He was a peacekeeping pacifist for the rest of his life, and this violent period certainly was a catalyst for his beliefs. We have the sketchbook for you to see later today in the main hall, and you'll also see my other memorabilia. So this book dates back to those days from World War I. Back from the war, his folks encouraged him to enter architecture school, as his mother came from a family of brickmakers and architects. He tried this, but it was too restrictive and had too much math and calculating. It was suggested the Bauhaus would be a good home for him. Walter Gropius, the founder and first director at that time at the Weimar location, accepted him after reviewing his impressive portfolio. Gropius later emigrated to the US as well and continued his successful career at Yale and as an architect. The Bauhaus was more than an art school. It emphasized values, community living, new social ideals, healthy living, spiritual inquisitiveness, craftsmanship, along with innovative designs of everyday objects that should be available for all. Classes in carpentry, stone masonry, weaving, and stained glass were offered. And new students were allowed to try many of these classes before they were expected to decide their specialty by year 2. Paul Klee taught weaving, Gerhard Marx taught sculpting and pottery, Klee and Maholy-Nagy and Brewer were all part of this influential Bauhaus style. Johannes Itten was one of Drewes's first-year teachers. Itten embodied the Bauhaus concept by his example of healthy and spiritual living, with promoting a vegetarian diet, studies of Eastern religions, introduction to a variety of philosophies, breathing practices, rhythmic gymnastics, healthy farming, and communal living, much more than your typical art school. At one time, the Bauhaus diet consisted of a mush of vegetables. This was rather bland, so the students added garlic to the food. They were soon known as garlic heads, as everyone started emitting a garlicky odor. Itten also introduced the color wheel, what we all learned in our first art classes today. Drewes was inspired by these concepts, although he had already studied Nietzsche and had delved into other concepts and philosophies beyond his Lutheran upbringing. The Wandervogel helped him with his long idle times in the trenches. I think he probably sketched and read more than he fought. But Nitschke was with him in the trenches and certainly inspired his earlier works, such as this early work of Ecce Homo. This was a 1921 series he did while he was at the Bauhaus. Each Bauhaus workshop was taught by two masters, a craft teacher and a design teacher. The students studied for 4 years and then became masters themselves. Some students became teachers at the Bauhaus, like Joseph Albers, and others took their learning and spread Bauhaus concepts to other schools around the world. We see these influences in India, Israel, Switzerland, and of course here in the United States. Some, like Herbert Bayer, spread Bauhaus concepts into the commercial advertising and design fields. Visiting the Aspen Institute is a real treat to see this enclave of Bauhaus influence. So Joseph Albers taught the stained glass as a young instructor, and Drewes enjoyed this medium for the play with color and transparency. We have a few of his very first watercolors from this class in 1920. Some, again, you'll see out on the main table in the hallway. This is one of them. Still has the vibrancy like it was painted yesterday. Again, from 1920. Drewes would meet up with Albers again in the US when they were both applying for the position of instructor at the Black Mountain College. Joseph and Annie got the job. I think Black Mountain chose the better deal, as Annie was an equally exemplary art professor and talented artist, but they never paid her a salary, so they got two for the price of one. Albers later became an influential professor at Yale, while Drewes went on to tenure at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. So you can see, even in 1921, at age 22, Drewes had already developed his signature monogram. You can see it in this corner. Most of the works you'll see today have this peace symbol emblem, which really isn't a peace symbol. Let's see. So he had already developed this signature monogram, and people think it's a peace sign, but it predates the peace sign by over 35 years, as it was not used as a peace sign until 1958. It was first used in a campaign for nuclear disarmament. It represents the semaphore letters to support this movement. It's all very apropos, though, because Drewes was a pacifist, as you've already seen, as well as a supporter for those who dealt with injustice. His mother had a great influence on this, as she opened her home to people of all backgrounds, and Werner's travels around the world also introduced him to people of many cultures, ethnicities, and beliefs. You'll see his strong support in his works of Gandhi, Rabbi Newman, Charles Erskine Wood, and the American Indian series that he's done, as well as the Harlem Renaissance series. These were done around 1930. So this was a time in New York where the Harlem Renaissance was just beginning, and there was a lot of movement between the artists, musicians, dancers, bringing new concepts, new ideas, and he was definitely influenced. Perhaps he'd never had this interaction in Germany. I had this at my last show, and this boy stared at me for the month I had the show, and the longer I looked at him, the more his wise eyes meant to me, and how much he's suffered in the world at such a tender age. Like his mother, Drewes also opened his home later in the United States, despite the personal family struggles of raising his own 3 boys during the Depression. He always felt others had it worse than him. Money earned from his art would often go back to German relatives and Jewish artists who were still struggling. In New York, he purchased a rundown farm property. His family would host children from New York City to come learn farming, hunting, canning, and pickling. Here he is trying to get a painting done with 3 of his little boys around his feet. This would provide food for many of them back in the city during these colder months. But I digress. Back to Germany and Werner's younger days. When he was barely 20, Werner purchased his first piece of art. As we all know, with many collectors in the room today, we'll peer into the window of a gallery and spot a piece that just talks to us. We have to have it. We're connected to it. And this happened to Werner with an abstract painting by sculptor and painter William Weyer. It was his fascination with it was his first fascination with abstract non-objective work. His family thought he had lost his marbles and refused to lend him the money to buy the piece. But his kind-hearted aunt was more pliable. It took him a while to pay her back, but he did, and he treasured this piece. William Weyer was also an exhibitor at Die Stirn in Berlin. So this is not the actual piece. Unfortunately, Drewes folks who refused to leave Germany during World War II cut the painting out of the canvas during the war. They were worried it would be seized by the Nazis, and it has been lost since that time. Soon Gropius ended the stained glass workshop, and he resisted allowing a painting class. Drewes was frustrated and decided if he wanted to learn to be a true painter, he would have to head to Italy to study Tintoretto, or to Spain to study El Greco or Velázquez. Travel was on a tight budget, and Drewes called these his hobo years. He was not only creative in his art, but also in how he could earn money, get food, and free transportation. He would put on Punch and Judy puppet shows in the local parks. The kids would sit mesmerized with his antics, and just at the crescendo of the drama, he would stop and send the kids away for intermission to collect food and coins for the hungry puppets before he would continue. In Italy, he laid up in an artist's flat. He was one of the original couch surfers, and he uncovered an old press in the closet. He dusted it off and began making travel postcards for sale. In Spain, he reacquainted with one of his Van der Vogel partners, Marguerite Schrapsdorf. She was working as a nurse in the Azores, and together they wanted to get to South America for their honeymoon. He could not get a visa to the US or to other countries in South America. Already there was prejudice against Germans and feared that they would bring in their infiltrating concepts of communism. To get there, he worked on a portrait of a captain heading to South America on a large freight barge. Drewes decided to make it a very elaborate portrait. It should include the cargo ship. The captain was getting nervous as his half-finished painting was not getting finished, and he was to set sail within a few days. Drewes came up with the solution. Just take me and my new bride along and I'll finish the portrait on board. That's how they got to South America. But back in Europe, he learned the styles and techniques of the European great painters. By studying their styles and trying to replicate their techniques, he honed his own style. He would be asked to do commissioned pieces of famous religious pieces. It wasn't his preference, but it kept him from starving. His favorite painter was El Greco. He loved this artist's vigorous style. El Greco concentrated his detail on his subjects, but the backgrounds were mere suggestions. So take a close look at this and look at the background. Here's Drewes's copy of the work, and I have this canvas with me still. So here's another version. This was done by Velázquez about the same period. It was a Baroque rendition of Coronation of the Virgin. So all of these were a theme that were reoccurrent at that time. His piece fits right in. I have another piece, another canvas that looks nothing like Drewes's work. It's this piece called Old Man. Perhaps some of our historians in the audience can help me with this. It's marked Manillas on the back. It looks a bit like a Rembrandt or another Dutch painting, but we know Drewes painted this in Madrid. Does anyone have any idea, perhaps, who it might be he was copying? Let me know if you think of anything. I had this at another show, and a young man was working on an app that you could take into the art museum, click on the piece, and it would tell you all about the piece. And I said, well, heck, let's try it on these two pieces. And sure enough, it identified his piece of the Virgin as a Renaissance, and it identified this as a Dutch, maybe Rembrandt. So I think Drewes did a pretty good job at his forgery. So back to our travelers. Drewes and Marguerite traveled throughout South America, at least in the countries they could get into. They then got up to Cuba and entered illegally into the United States on a gambling boat. At that time, they had gambling boats leaving Florida, going to Cuba for gambling, and coming back into Florida, since gambling was illegal at that time in the US. So they snuck in and spent a lot of time in the US and honed their English. He was entranced with industrialization and accomplished many images of the construction of Buenos Aires, San Francisco, Chicago, and New York City. This is Chicago grain elevators done as an intaglio in 1926. Here's another perspective of this, done in the same year. These weren't commissioned. He just wanted to do them and didn't expect anyone to purchase these pictures of cranes or grain elevators or large buildings. Somehow their next stop was in Japan. I really don't know how they got from the US to Japan. So many questions I have to ask him. Japan was where he learned many techniques and the value of using a good quality printing paper. He rarely strayed from printing on anything other than Japanese papers after that, and you can see that in his woodcuts today. The only other paper he would occasionally use was a Minnesota mining paper, which also offers a nice texture and a heavier density. As someone who works with a lot of his raw prints, it's a much nicer paper to work with. They proceeded to get into Russia and experienced early travel on the Siberian Railroad. Roadblocks and challenges confronted them, but they always managed to finagle their way out. We're only poor artists. See our work? And on one occasion, he had a sketch of an Asian prince. This piece connected them to royalty and kept them out of trouble once again. So feeling homesick, they finally returned to Germany, where the Bauhaus had now relocated to Dessau, and he was readmitted. The Bauhaus was glad to have Drewes back, and Drewes was glad to be back after 2 years on the road. Kandinsky was now teaching and held the first painting class. They connected well and continued a lifelong mentor friendship until Kandinsky's death in 1944. In one letter written to Kandinsky to Drewes, Kandinsky commends Drewes. You're really moving forward. Your wrist has become looser, which is naturally the result of your developing inner freedom. Influenced by Kandinsky, Drewes turned toward pure abstraction in his early New York City years. Letters of their correspondence are available to the public through the Smithsonian American Archives collection, which houses the majority of Drewes's photos and papers and the largest collection of his woodcuts and intaglios. Germany was different now under Weimar Republic, though, and in 1930, the Nazi Party had taken over Germany's parliament. Non-objective art was considered degenerate. Fellow Jewish artists and friends were being persecuted. and Drewes no longer felt safe with his wife and 2 young sons. They were able to get a visa and legally immigrate to New York City, a new mecca of freedom and creativity for artists, dancers, and musicians. But 1930 was also the beginning of the Great Depression, and jobs, especially for an artist, were hard to find. But that Bauhaus work ethic came through, and Drewes's talent shined. He had mentors in New York City that also helped introduce him to the New York City art scene. So from 1934 to 1941, Drewes worked on the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, working up to Director of Graphic Arts. He worked with the American Artists Congress and Society Anime in 1936. By this time, he had become a US citizen. Within the year, he founded the American Abstract Artists Group along with Bolotowski, Asher, Albers, Brown, and de Koenig, Dreyer, and others. Arshil Gorky did not join this group. De Koenig quotes in his biography how Gorky wanted to limit the membership to an elite group. Drewes disagreed, saying the group should encourage artists and not be judgmental. Gorky could not consent to this, and that this group was not worthy of him. He would leave. Drewes pointed to the door and said, okay, there's the door. So, this group is still viable today. I had a retrospective show for Drewes in 2018 with the Washington Print Club and George Washington U. We called that show Trespassing, and it included a portfolio of AAA artists from today with a capstone piece from Drewes. Trespassing was the perfect name for it, as we were talking about the boundaries of art and should art have boundaries. The art in this portfolio was eclectic, and I had to keep reminding myself not to be judgmental, but open, as Drewes would have been. He began teaching at this time at Columbia University, Brooklyn College, and with the Stanley Hayter's Atelier 17, along with Max Ernst, Lisansky, John Farren, Miro, Calder, Chagall, and Pollock. He did a series of wonderful intaglios at this time. With his access to a variety of presses and the inspiration of this crew. This was done in 1944, one of my favorite pieces called Dance of the Mermaids, done on an aluminum plate. Here's another piece, Praying Manted. I always thought it was only a black and white, and then I had a collector in Texas send me this photo he had where it was colored with this yellow. I showed this at a recent exhibit I had in November 2024 in Bethesda. We were commemorating the upcoming 100th birthday of the Atelier 17. Ann Schaefer, former associate curator of prints and drawings at the Baltimore Art Museum, came to speak, and she laughed when she saw this print. Apparently, all of the New York City Atelier 17 artists were mesmerized by praying mantids and the sexual innuendos of the female eating off the head of their mates. They incorporated this theme into their art, and some of these artists even raised the mantids as pets. So I guess Drewes was right in on the fun. After a quick stint helping Moholy Nagy teach at the Institute of Design in Chicago in 1946, Drewes took a post at Washington U in St. Louis, Missouri with Max Beckman. He stayed there for 19 years before returning to the East in Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania, spreading the Bauhaus concepts to the Midwest. I think he found this environment of St. Louis a very comfortable, it was a strong German influence, and maybe a bit of a slower pace than the New York City grind. Werner's first wife, Marguerite, passed away here in 1960 after years of supporting Drewes and continuing her own weaving art and raising their 3 rambunctious boys. The last boy was born in New York City. Werner could not survive with her, literally. He thought you could cook with linseed oil. Mary Lisher Terhune, a gifted jewelry artist and professor at Washington U, came to his rescue. She had better marry him, or he would starve himself to death or poison himself. She ended up being an equally supportive companion with her knowledge of art history and love for travel. She was also a wonderful grandmother to us. It was through her that I learned of Werner's antics and family history, and maybe some of the darker periods in his life that his sons had not shared with us. But by the 1960s, they had retired from Wash U and moved to a small farmette in Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania. An exhausting endeavor, but they both had passion for living off the land, and finally they could nurture that while still being close to the art world of New York City. Later, they downsized near our house to Reston, Virginia, where he could continue to print and paint and collage and teach into his 86th year. His last job would be teaching students how to use the donated printing press to be shared by the Loudoun and George Mason community colleges. After 40 years, he would return to his Atelier 17 plates to complete some unfinished series. We have some of these aluminum plates here today for you to look at. Here is a picture of him in his studio in Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania. He continued to work and create to the day he died. Here he is in his last studio in Reston, Virginia. His work ethic included painting, carving wood blocks during the day, with short rests on his studio cot, followed by collaging at night at a table in his living room. Meanwhile, I would visit to help them in the garden or with some other chore. And his wife, my step-grandmother, we called her Maria, would work on a quilt. And he would tease us, "Why are you cutting up fabric and re-sewing it back together?" And I would tease back, "Why are you cutting up paper and repasting it together?" I wish I'd learned jewelry from her, but I realize now it wasn't really the quilt we were working on, it was learning the family heritage. He always had about 3 to 5 works in progress, but still found time to enjoy travel and cherish meals with friends and family and spend time in his garden or take a swim at the nearby lake. Here he is, a couple more pictures of him working. Take this time to peruse the collection today. Be sure to see his colorful multi-block woodcuts. Werner was the king of the American abstract movement here, and his works include such an intensity of color, texture, and structure, being dubbed two-dimensional sculptures. I hope this journey through Werner Drewes' life hasn't exhausted you, but instead inspired you. This was a man that lived to his full potential and expected his students and family to do the same. So go out there and don't waste a minute. Create, believe in your passions, be open to all ideas, and be accepting of your fellow humankind. To see more of Drewes' work, there are many museums, along with the Huntington, that hold his works, the Guggenheim, the MoMA, Smithsonian American Art, Chicago Art, the Whitney, Carnegie. It's rather fun for me visiting any city to look him up and see what works they might have of Drewes. But I want to thank you for coming here today. And I thank the Huntington Museum of Art for this wonderful show, beautifully curated, and the support of the work of Werner Drewes. Thank you. Has any questions? Okay. Well, yeah, sir?
Sorry about of us who don't have real artistic ability but appreciation always wonder how much of this is inborn genius and how much is able to be passed on. How many of his descendants also were recognized in the field of art? Or did it sort of, I know you appreciate this and you may be a wonderful artist yourself, but I just wonder how this, I'm in awe of art and music genius, but I just wonder how much of that is nature and how much was nurture in your mind.
That's a great question, and it's been fun because we're now, Ben and I, my husband here today, we have 3 grandkids, so now we're on our next generation, his great-great-grandchildren, and he has 8 grandchildren. One has passed away, but all of us have elements of not just creativity. One of us does prehistoric creatures for a museum in California, models. Another does ceramics with Italy. That she then brings to this country. We have a glass artist, we have a sketcher, a jewelry maker. So it definitely has filtered down. We have a ceramicist as well. But we have worked it all into our own careers. So I enjoy fused glass, and people say, oh, you're an artist too. This is the other part of it. I'm not an artist. Maybe I'm crafty. The difference is discipline. And that's what he gave his work. It was foremost his passion. It was secondary, I hate to say it, to his marriages, his children, his teaching. He was so disciplined and had to create. And that's the difference, I think, between the artist and someone who enjoys doodling. If that helps to answer. But again, it was fun to see. I mean, we all have essence of the architecture in us too, you know, with remodeling and designing our homes. And so it was pretty strong, but the big difference is that discipline and that work ethic. That's what, you can have the talent, but not have the fortitude, and you have to have both. But also working with his work, as you'll see today, I never get tired of working with it. It's always refreshing. Each piece is so unique. And you do wonder, how could he have this many ideas in his mind? It's a question.
What does he want from his audience? If he's with someone, you know, from the public, in front of one of his pieces of work, does he want to tell them about it, or does he want to ask them about it?
No, I love these questions. So I remember when we were little kids, we would go to his shows, and we would walk around, and we would look at an abstract piece, and we would try to come up with the titles ourselves. Or you'll have people sitting in front of it trying to see something in a totally non-objective piece of art. And they'll see completely different things. And it's fun to hear that. But he would never say, he had really unique titles. Notice the titles today as you go in front of each piece, because they'll blow you away. You know, it won't be what you expect. But he wasn't looking necessarily to send you a message or to tell you what he was seeing. It was more of an emotional impact to you, and he would listen to what you thought about it, but he wouldn't force feed you what he was trying to say. It's interesting. I did have one show oriented towards artist's message of humanitarianism, and I had like the Gandhi and the American Native Indians in it, and a couple other pieces, some hunger photos, woodcuts from Bangladesh. And again, they were more portraits, but again, not a word on there. And it was more, you had to feel it to know what he was trying to tell you. And again, was, you know, I think he did almost, there's a selfishness in there, which might be not fair to say, but he did it because he had to get it out of himself. He wasn't, necessarily trying to make something pretty for you. He had to get it out. Yeah.
Do you know, did he maintain any relationships with other Bauhaus alumni when he was in the United States?
Yeah, definitely. Clay and Kandinsky. Luckily, a lot of the folks came here to the U.S. They were all great letter writers back then, unlike us now. And that's a gift to us because we're able to have those. He kept things, and we have those at the archives now. So we do see these interactions that unfortunately we're losing all that with our texting. We're going to regret that later, I think. He always had an open home. Luckily, his wives were very good at entertaining and cooking for him, whoever would show up. And there was a wonderful interaction of artists and friends from all over the world coming in and out of their home. Yeah, I'm trying to think of any other specific, certainly Albers, Max Beckman, till he passed away out in St. Louis. It was kind of interesting, Maholy-Nagy, I remember his first wife visiting us when we lived in South America, but he was dying of cancer at the Chicago School of Art and needed to finish up his session, and he asked Werner Drewes, it was a summer session, and he had him come live with his family, and Drewes finished it up as he was dying of cancer, so there was that connection. Now, why Drewes didn't go on and work at Chicago School of Art, I'm not sure. I have so many questions for him now that I'll never know. Every now and then I'll get the answers to something I didn't expect though, which is what's so fun about this work. His students, I'm still in touch with a couple of them, but they're in their 90s. There was one artist who lived near us, Eileen Feldman. She studied with him at St. Louis, heard me speak at George Washington U, came up and said, you're not going to believe this, but he was my first year professor at Wash U. And she went on to work in Japan and learned the white line technique. And I had the luck to go and visit her at her studio and video her working, and we exchanged work. And I was really touched that one of the pieces she chose was a portrait that Werner had done of himself. So she's since passed away, but connections like that have been great. I'll have people connect in the website, Drewes Fine Art, who say, oh, my dad has always had this picture in his house. He painted Castine, Maine from his porch. Come and visit me, you'll see where he painted it. So wonderful. We may not have the letters, but we have more of these connections. That'd been great.
There's a picture up there in the corner of a prairie, and it has stubble, distinguishable, and the prairie, distinguishable, but there's a blue block sort of thing in the corner, and it has me flummoxed. Do you have any insights on that?
Oh my, I don't know, I'll have to grab me afterwards and we'll take a look at it. Probably your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, it's always, it's interesting. Sometimes I'll be working on some of his work because I have some of his raw material. I'll be working on a collage or a mini oil novel. All of a sudden I'll see a pattern in the picture and I'll think, I've seen this before, and I'll go rummaging around trying to see, and I'll find the connection, maybe a mini oil to a larger oil. And then you're wondering, well, which did he do first, the mini oil or the larger oil or the woodcut? And maybe one picture has a donkey in it. Well, would you put the donkey in later, or would you take it out? And so it's a lot of really fun sleuthing. Yeah. Shall we all head out and get some of those good snacks in the hallway?